Hello, my name is Jackson Thomas, and today I will be talking about murder representation in Latin American literature. For this presentation, we will look at how three books represent murder in their respective settings and see how it answers the essential question of, to what extent do the authors of the three novels initiate the representation of murder, and how does it affect the themes of the book, and does it have a positive or negative impact on the reader's overall enjoyment of the book? The three books that I will be discussing are North by Edmundo Paz Soldan, that's set in Mexico, Down the Rabbit Hole by Juan Pablo Villalobos, that's also set in Mexico, and Our Lady of the Assassins by Fernando Vallejo, that one's set in Colombia. The two main countries of focus here are Colombia and Mexico. According to this graph, the homicide rate is 19.5 people per 100,000 in Mexico, and 24 people per 100,000 in Colombia. Considering the violence that appears to be going on in these countries at this time, it makes sense that violence would be a recurring theme throughout each novel. Each novel uses murder to develop and show its characters in a unique way. The way that each of the authors goes about portraying each murder through the language they use is what makes readers want to read more and stick around, with the exceptions of an instance in North where the murder is counterproductive to the novel. Fernando Vallejo's Our Lady of the Assassins is unique from the other two novels, as murder was a central theme in the book from the beginning. After a rude taxi driver kicked Fernando and Alexis out of his cab, Alexis shot him, which led to the cab exploding. Fernando, who always hated cab drivers, stated, "Let him finish burning so he won't suffer anymore." 35,000 taxis there had been in Medellin. 34,999 now remained. The fact that there are no exclamation points in this line of dialogue shows how there was simply no sense of urgency, and shows that the characters and citizens of Colombia had become so desensitized to murder in this time period. The amount of murder that is prevalent in this book is what allows Vallejo to join it with dark humor and complicate the story with Fernando's love for Alexis and eventually, towards the end of the book, Wilmar. Vallejo's ability to add little instances of humor is what separates him from Soldan, as even though the murder is brutal, readers are still engaged to see what happens next, as it is not all completely dark. As more murders are committed, Alexis, who seems so desensitized to murder since the start, becomes even more robotic in performing the act. Vallejo's development of Alexis shows the bigger picture in the story that murder is simply a part of the day-to-day in Colombia, and it further proves Fernando's point that Colombia is not as he remembered it, and was the most criminal country on earth. A fact further proven by this graph. Anyone who had wronged either himself or Fernando gets a bullet through the head, and that's just the way it is. Furthermore, the relationship between Fernando and his younger lovers makes readers want to see what happens next, especially because Alexis and Wilmar had such dangerous occupations as hitmen. The chemistry between these characters and their development throughout the novel, as more aspects of their lives are revealed, are what keep readers enticed and allow for a more interesting plot to be discovered. While the murders are morbid in the instances where they just let him finish burning, and the relationships are complicated, Vallejo certainly excels in showing character development through an exciting bit of action. North by Edmundo Paz Soldan has one of the most graphic murder scenes toward the end of an already brutal first chapter to read. The main character, Jesus, a high school dropout, finishes off this part of the book in the most egregious act anyone can think of. He and his two cousins raped a stripper named Susie, and when it was Jesus' turn, the details become extremely graphic, leaving nothing to the imagination. As Jesus continues, he starts to imagine Susie as his 11-year-old sister, Mary Louisa, whom he tried to rape earlier. As soon as Jesus finishes, Jesus stabs her in the heart, and the following dialogue was had between the three of them. "What the fuck you do that for?" Medardo asked Jesus. "She was gonna rat on us." "Primo, you shouldn't have done that." "Better safe than sorry, way." "I never thought you—" Justino stammered. "Me neither." There are no exclamations here, no sense of urgency. These boys are obviously troubled. It appears as if they did this simply to look cool. That's certainly why Jesus did it. This is a far more of a graphic lead-up to any of the murders in any of the other novels, and there was certainly enough death in both of those books. Unlike Our Lady of the Assassins and Down the Rabbit Hole, this murder scene alone was enough for many readers to not want to read any more of the book. While Juan Pablo Villalobos attaches readers with a sense of childish curiosity, and Fernando Vallejo keeps readers engaged with the extensive action and the interesting relationship of Fernando, as well as Alexis and Wilmar. Edmundo Paz Soldan fails to keep engagement with readers, as the rape scene prior to the murder allows for readers not to care what happens to Jesus in the rest of the story. There had not been a reason to root for him prior to this scene, and after this scene, all connection is lost between reader and the main character as the rooting interest goes with it. Juan Pablo Villalobos offers readers the perspective of seeing murder from the viewpoint of a child. The child, named Tocli, is a spoiled child who lives in a Mexican drug lord's palace. The drug lord just so happens to be his father. After traveling to Liberia with his father and tutor, Tocli finds two Liberian pygmy hippopotamuses, but both unfortunately need to be killed after falling ill. Tocli insists on watching and has a tough time coping with the killing of the female hippo. Except she didn't die with one shot. She was moving around and didn't stop moving until the fourth shot. Then it turned out I am not macho after all, and I started to cry like a faggot. I also wet my pants. The language used by Villalobos as Tocli refers to himself as a faggot just for crying shows that Tocli has not developed into a respectable person since the start, as he still uses such vulgarity. Furthermore, the punctuation of just periods with no exclamations that Villalobos shares with Vallejo and Soldan show the same theme, that there is no sense of urgency when it comes to murder, whether of humans or animals in these parts of the world. A way in which it does show Tocli's development, or lack thereof, is that he wet his pants, which tends to be what little kids do when they are overcome with sadness. The scene almost makes readers feel sympathetic for him, as all readers understand what it is like to be a child, and feel an intense amount of grief, just as young Tocli has. For a child who has never known more than 15 people in his life, this is obviously a jarring experience for him. This murder scene accomplishes its goal of making readers want to keep reading, and it certainly impacts the book in a positive fashion. Tocli had been talking about getting one of these hippos for the entirety of the book, and his main mission in Liberia had ended in disappointment. This scene makes readers want to see what happens as they return to Mexico amidst tumultuous times in the drug cartel. For this slide, we will look at how the murder scenes affect the overall novel themes in the novels. In Nort, Soldan goes about describing the murder of Susie in vivid detail, and throughout the book thus far, the only themes that are seen developing are that of violence, sex, and anger. All three of these can be seen in the quote, "Susie's cheekbones were black and blue, and her nose was shattered. Nearly unconscious by now. She was lucky, though. She hardly felt the blade puncture her heart." This graphic scene succeeds in developing the themes into more extreme acts of themselves, those being violence, anger, and sex. Whereas before, Jesus did not succeed in raping his sister, and his anger had not reached a peak level, now he has reached that level of peak anger many humans find hard to fathom, and that he murdered and raped Susie with his cousins watching. Now, just as life is starting to get good for Fernando and Alexis in Vallejo's novel, the theme of tragedy introduces itself in grueling fashion. Alexis is gunned down and takes a bullet right through the heart, uttering Fernando's name as life ends. This weighed heavily on Fernando, as he states, "In the days that followed, my name as spoken by Alexis in his dying moment began to weigh down on me like a tombstone." Murder, violence, love, and tragedy had all been felt by Fernando in such a short amount of time. The simile used of "like a tombstone" shows just how much this death hurt, as Alexis finally addressed him by his given name of Fernando. This was unlike any tragedy experienced by Tocli or Jesus, although Tocli was impressively upset with the death of the hippopotamuses. Toward the end of Villalobos' novel, Tocli and his father begin to watch a samurai documentary in which one of the samurais commits seppuku, a ritual in which a samurai cuts off the head of another in an act of honor. Later in the night, Tocli's father says to Tocli, "One day you'll have to do the same to me." This generates the theme of responsibility, and that Tocli may soon be forced into a great deal of responsibility, as the death of his father would leave him in charge of the drug gang which his father is the king of. The themes prevalent in this novel before this scene of murder, drugs, and youth are what led into the theme of responsibility becoming so important, because as readers they are led to feel impressed as that all of these major issues are thrusted upon Tocli at such a young age. This being contrary to what happened with Jesus, as he was a young man, but he laid all of these issues upon himself, and that he was the one that wanted to be cool with his cousins, but he was also the one that raped Susie and ended up murdering her. Now it is similar to what happens to Fernando, but Fernando actually falls in love with Alexis and Wilmar respectively, and that is what leads him to experiencing such murder and violence. However, he experiences it at a much older age. All three of these scenes do have an impact on the themes presented in the novel. For Our Lady of the Assassins, it introduces a new theme, tragedy. For Down the Rabbit Hole, this scene introduces responsibility. However, for North, this scene only amplifies the themes already prevalent in the novel. In summary, each author uses language to show that there is no sense of urgency when it comes to murder. Only Vallejo and Villalobos do it in an exciting way that keeps readers engaged and looking to see what happens next. Soldan was simply too graphic too early on in the book and left a negative impression on readers' minds. The approach that Vallejo and Villalobos left on readers was positive in that people were left wondering what was going to happen next, keeping them engaged in what was going on in the book. Thank you.